USAID's Market Systems and Partnerships activity.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dunn Grover, Deputy Chief of Party of the USAID Honduras Transforming Market Systems activities. So I'm also very excited to be here today.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Bolden. I am just put in the chat for everyone as well. I'm Technical Director at Link. I'm currently in Martinsburg, West Virginia in the US. I support programs in many different places, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben Fowler. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Market Share Associates, and I'm calling in from Denver, Colorado, USA.
Well, we are going to get started. I am really humbled, honestly, to have the opportunity to kick this discussion off. We have an all-star group of speakers and facilitators today, and a really exciting group of MEL specialists from around the world with really rich programmatic experience. And we're looking forward to the discussions today, to meet each other and to exchange some of the successes, some of the challenges, some of the aha moments that you all and others have been experiencing around this challenge of assessing systems change. I think we can all agree in the basic logic that there are deeper issues that are shaping why things are the way they are, and that the closer that our programming gets to tackling those issues, the more sustainable and scaled the impact that our work can have. And that is important to all of us because we've dedicated our professions to that impact. But actually monitoring those changes as they are happening and using that as part of an overall approach to learning and adaptation in our programs is a lot harder in reality. And so we're excited to kind of create this space to support each other in that effort. Just a quick word about the program that I work on, Market Systems and Partnerships. We're hosting this discussion today. We're a global program, and our mandate from USAID is to advance learning and good practice in market systems development and private sector engagement. And as part of that, we have a stream of work around M&E and CLA, which is a really important area in being able to implement a market systems development or a private sector engagement approach. Just a little bit of background on how kind of how we got to here today. So about a year ago, we hosted a series of peer learning exchanges with MEL leads from around the world, several of which are here today facilitating this discussion. And these kind of virtual exchanges ran for about 4 to 6 months over a series of facilitated discussions. And along the bottom here, you can see 3 of the outputs that kind of captured the takeaways from those discussions. And one of those is really the focus of this discussion today. So one of those groups focused on assessing systems change. And the output was this practitioner's guidance to assessing systems change. You can see here on your screen, so the guidance is sort of the underlying framing for a lot of the discussion that we will have today. Along the left-hand side of the screen is a summary of many of the specific templates, tools, tips that are available in that guidance. If you haven't seen it already, take a screenshot here with the QR code, or you can also find it on our website at agrilinks.org/MSP. About a couple of months ago, we also hosted a discussion with a lot of the organizational level MEL leads at about 18 or so different USAID implementing partners. And we're excited today to take that discussion global. This is our agenda for today. I'm gonna hand it over to one of our facilitators, Megan Bolden, in a few minutes, who's gonna share out some of the feedback that many of you shared with us when you registered. And we'll get to know who's here in our discussion today a little bit. And then we'll unpack what we really mean by systems change and some insights around how various programs are assessing it in practice. And then we're going to break out into some kind of peer exchange breakout groups around some of the specific tactics and kind of issue areas that many of you prioritized as being important to you. Particular metrics, the kind of challenge of contribution, and rubrics as well, for getting a sense of the kind of extent of change. And then at the end of that, we will come back in plenary and open up space for folks to weigh in on what else USAID should be doing, either in the space of assessing systems change or more broadly in your work, in your M&E work. We have funds to invest, and we have 3 more years as a program and a mandate from USAID for that money to matter. So we'd love to get your thoughts on where that should go. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the office hours that we're going to be opening up for some one-to-one technical assistance at the coming up over the next month or so. Just to quickly acknowledge, we have a really great group of folks to lead us through today. And I will let their names and their titles and organizations speak for themselves here. And with that, I will pass over to you, Megan.
Great, thanks so much, Anna. Well, as a MEL specialist in background, I am super excited that more than 150 of you actually registered today and answered our questions. And what's so great about pre-surveys when we do registration is that they help us really understand who's planning to be in the room, what their expectations are, and a little bit more about what your needs are. And so I just really wanted to take a second to highlight, recognize, and thank you for responding. More than half of you who registered today, and hopefully who've attended, we'll double check that after, self-identify or have a title that has MEL or CLA in it. And you can see from the pie chart on the side that we're pretty much split between people at a level. Titles slightly vary between organizations, but between director, manager, specialist, or officer. And a few of you are assistants as well in the MEL space. And those of you who are not with MEL or CLA in your title are either COPs or DCOPs, consultants, other position, or a technical sector position. And I'm really grateful that we have such a nice mix of people who have come from many different organizations. More than 30 organizations are represented today. And I really appreciate the diversity of the organizations, from really large traditional USAID implementing partners to some of the non-traditional and smaller organizations. You can see from the map also that we have a really diverse crowd that registered for today. And I wanted to just highlight that Oftentimes, these webinars are highly attended by people from the United States or other donor countries. And I wanted to highlight that we're actually the minority from the US space, representing less than 30% of those who had registered for today's event. And I did want to give a shout out, especially to Ethiopia and to Ghana and Nigeria, who are among the highest represented countries as registrants today. So that's just a demographics, who you've got in the room type of rundown. Next, I just want to highlight a little bit about some of the challenges that you shared with us about assessing systems change. So what I've done is grouped here some of your responses into topical areas based on your responses. And I wanted to highlight places where we're going to be able to address these challenges somewhat today and where we're not. So first, I did want to say that we also heard in person in DC that there is still a large contingent that feels that what systems change is still not clear in the community. And today we are going to spend time on that. So listen up when Dunn is speaking on that section. We really do want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're talking about today, what we mean when we say what systems changes, and really how it impacts people, why we care about it. In terms of contribution, we'll have a mini Mel clinic about that. We will probably not be able to cover all of the topics on contribution that have been raised. And I did want to say that if you feel very strongly that a challenge that you shared should be addressed today, or you need it to be addressed in your work, and we don't get to it, great news is that when Ben is facilitating, he's going to actually ask you what MSP should prioritize in the next 3 years. And feel free to add in those areas that are burning challenges that you don't feel like we or other webinars, guidance, or materials or technical assistance that's out there is really addressing. I did want to just mention a few other things that are important from here. The slowness of change is something I'm going to talk about shortly. And I do think that this is a real challenge for us when we talk about systems change, and we as a community need to get some clarity on what real expectations we mean and expect from systems change of programs that have a duration somewhere between 3 and 7 years. And then the lack of prioritization is something also that I will touch on, but that we can continue to build on, and we're really depending on you. So please feel free to continue to engage on this discussion with us. Finally, I just wanted to say I really appreciated the people that said, keep it simple and digestible. I feel like sometimes as a community, we can use jargon that is very difficult for others to understand. If you find that's happening today, either in the presentations or in the mini Mel clinics, please, we are a safe space. Say, I don't understand what you mean by this. Or why does Megan keep using the word feedback? She doesn't seem to be using it right. You know, feel free to ask these questions. We really hope that we can hear from you. Okay, so now for the fun part, in my opinion, where we get to go through the iceberg model that I think many of you are likely familiar with, but I'm not sure that you've ever tried to apply it to how Mel functions as a system, and to what extent we're actually producing useful systemic change assessments. So first, I want to just talk about the model itself. Icebergs exist as a concept that we use a construct to try to analyze and understand problems deeply within a system. And this is one of the ways that can be done. And I want to give a concrete example first, and then I will give you an example of Mel. So oftentimes we see a problem and we see there's a fire. We need to respond to the fire. That's at this top of this iceberg. And we need to react because we see a problem and it's very obvious and clear it needs a response. Sometimes we're able to take that step back and we're able to say, okay, but seems like fires keep happening in winter. Why do they keep happening in winter? And we start doing a little bit more of analysis, and we're able to recognize some patterns or trends. Maybe there's some kind of link to how people are heating their homes, and that's why we're seeing more house fires. Or maybe we're not having enough staff in wintertime at some of the firehouses, and maybe we just need to have more staff available that can, you know, also be more responsive to some of these fires or talk about fire prevention. These are some of the things that we might be seeing. Underlying structure, we might be seeing, you know, well, why is it that we're seeing them every winter? Why are we not seeing them staffed fully? Does it have something to do with policies or funding that's going to our firefighting? Does it have something to do with the fact that most of the poorer neighborhoods don't have any central heat and are relying on building fires within their homes with not good ventilation, or on kerosene heat or other types of heat that are easy to start fires? Maybe the structures of those houses or those apartment buildings are not safe, and maybe there's some sort of, you know, funding that's affecting the way that that pattern is happening. And then there's something maybe even a little deeper on this fire situation, which is maybe people don't think it's worth investing in those areas. Maybe they don't think that it's worth looking at alternative sources of heat, especially for a low income population. And then we might be able to start thinking of, well, why is the system structured this way? Why do these fires keep coming back, and what we can really do at a deeper level to address this so that we're not always every winter fighting fires. So let's think of that now as MEL. When we comes to like MEL and systemic change assessment, what's our problem? Like, we hear from people, we're not able to effectively use systemic change assessments during our programming. This is a common thing that we're hearing. It's like an event or system, a symptom that we're hearing over and over and over again. Why are we hearing that? What's really affecting that? We don't have all the answers, but we did get together in DC, as Anna mentioned, with a few headquarters staff earlier this year in September. And we asked in an exercise for everyone in the room to identify 1 to 2 events that they see that are happening. Here you can see 2 of them that I've pulled from the groups of the participants. We asked them what's causing them to repeat those patterns and trends you can see in the pink. Then we asked them, go a little deeper. You know, are there structures that are really causing this? And then we asked them at the very bottom of the iceberg, you know, what are those beliefs, values, and assumptions that are really affecting how MEL operates and is able to generate, disseminate, utilize, work with others or not on systemic change assessment, or using better assessment in programming on systems programming. And some of the things here I've paraphrased. You can actually see later today the actual icebergs and the sticky notes from your colleagues. Some of them I've combined, you'll see here. But some of the things that I find really telling and also challenging, and that we'd like you to reflect on within your own organizations and your own projects after today, is why would projects not really know what kind of systems change they seek and be fearful of it, and yet still say we have a systems project or a systems change project? Why is there this belief that success is only on short-term project life results? What can you do on your projects and within your organizations to tackle that? What can we do as MSP stakeholders and demanders of MSP, since later we're going to get to be able to makes our suggestions in the next 3 years to really change this so that this is not how we analyze the system. And this is not the kinds of challenges that we see when it comes to systems change assessment in our programming. Okay, I am sharing the pictures here from our in-person DC workshop, but like I said, we'll share them on a Miro board where you can actually zoom in and see everyone's letters and great art going forward. All right, now I'm going to pass it over to Dunn, and you'll hear from me again later.
All right, thanks, Megan. See if I can navigate. All right, so I thought maybe it'd be helpful to kind of look backwards, right? So I work on a program called the USAID Honduras Transforming Market Systems activity. I started off as the MEL specialist. And so when I first started my position in 2019, one of my first tasks at startup was to develop a MEL plan, right? And at the time I knew, given the name Transforming Market Systems, that there was this emphasis on systemic change as part of the approach. So I wrote what I thought was, I think, cutting edge or effective approach. So I mentioned how we would use outcome harvesting. We'd have sentinel indicators. We do social network analysis. And I proudly submitted this first version to USAID. And I think and politely, in other words, they came back and said, well, nice try, but try again. And I was a bit curious. And at the time, I heard this quote, right? This is actually from a previous mission director. And I thought to myself, wow, like they're really serious about this. Like, how am I going to measure and tell if the systems become more competitive? How has it changed to become more resilient? How do I actually do this in a quality way that meets our kind of standards and criteria around data? And so that really kind of started this journey, right? Like 4 MEL plans later, countless trials and errors, finding out what didn't work, probably dozens, if not hundreds of discussions, trying to figure out with other people. And I think from that, I think I learned a lot, being able to connect with my peers and understanding what they had found, how they had troubleshooted these different types of challenges. So today's really about that, right? That spirit of learning from each other and what we've done that's worked, because it's really kind of a journey I found applying this approach. A colleague recently used the word systemic intent, and it really resonated with me because it emphasized that systems change is a deliberate approach. It's about developing this narrative of systems change. And in order to build this narrative, we need to understand the system, prioritize the changes we want to make, theorize how those changes might unfold, and to generate the desired impact, right? And although we don't have all the answers at the outset, right? There's a lot of unknowns. We do have systemic intent. And it was really validating to see from the pre-survey that 39% of programs have this systemic intent. They have defined objectives that they are actively monitoring, that they're making decisions, whatever methodology they use based on that. And to me, that's really a really key milestone for programs. If I recall back to where I was, I probably fell more in the second camp where of persons that responded that, yeah, systems change is part of our goal, but it's a super vague concept. And we haven't yet figured out a way to integrate a process within our MEL and programmatic systems to effectively assess and take decisions based off it. So turning that concept into an action, I think, is one of the first hurdles we face in MEL. But what are we actually measuring? What is systemic change? And I searched 30 different definitions from different funders and foundations, and I think there was maybe 100+ distinct terminology and concepts that got bundled into them, which was a little overwhelming. But let's just go through a little bit about what we kind of mean. So I tend to bucket it into a couple categories. One is sort of the expert category of I know it when I see it. So persons that have experience assessing systems, we bring them in, and then they can help tell us if something's systemic. This can be helpful, but it's also limiting in the fact that it kind of makes it something that's not integrated within our regular processes, right? It sort of takes the agency away from the partners and teams in assessing systems change. So maybe not the preferred overall approach. The second is kind of the opposite. It's where you see kind of the success story version of systemic change. Everything gets labeled as systemic, and it sort of doesn't have any types of quality criteria around it or thresholds for what is or what isn't. And so it's hard to infer value, right? It's hard to assign value. It just kind of becomes a marketing piece as much as a real assessment. The third approach I see, perhaps that isn't ideal, is systems change is change with a bunch of zeros on it. I think it's a quote I pulled from someone from the last workshop. I find this definition also a bit reductionistic because I think it ignores many other important elements to change that's just not about counting heads or number of people that we can reach. So don't get too overwhelmed with this. I'm going to give you kind of what I think is a useful definition and also talk about why you should kind of think about developing your own. And I think there's two things to have in mind, right? Like one is systems change is interdisciplinary. It emerged from the fields of ecology, engineering, sociology, and other sciences. Because it emerged from different fields, it brings different terminology and perspectives. So that's a key takeaway or insight, right? Like systems change is subjective. Therefore, we rely on multiple perspectives in assessing it. It's not expert-based, it's participatory, it's engaging. We get diverse opinions on it. And I think two is that systems change is contextual. Systems change depends on the specific challenges and issues we're addressing within a system. Those challenges shape our understanding of what systems change would entail. Therefore, it's relative often to different contexts. And so I'm a firm believer that there should be flexibility in how you define these so-called criteria for success in terms of systemic change. Maybe a quick poll. I don't know if people want to share in the chat maybe some definitions that they use to define systems change, or ones that you've heard that really resonated. I think it would just be useful to kind of see and hear how other people are defining it. So the chat's on the bottom right. If you could just kind of top of your head, like no need to research, like how do you think a systems change? Do you all have, is there a definition that you're using or way that you're thinking about it? All right, so I like these. One, I hear changing the conditions that hold a wicked problem in place. That's great. Systems change to me is things are fundamentally different than before, right? So some significance of change. Another one, addressing the underlying root causes, right? Fixing the real problem, not just addressing the symptoms of those problems. Change that is sticky, right? So after the project ends, things just don't revert back to how they were before, but they sustain themselves. Addressing the needs of problems and issues. Who is benefiting from systems change? A really important criteria. Long-lasting impacts at scale, right? So we have these characteristics of system change, such as scale, higher order transformation of linkages. So this idea that systems change can happen at multiple levels within a system, and that it involves transformation of kind of system processes. Scalable and sustainable, relying on incentives. I keep putting them in the chat. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think we're starting to round out some of what the concept is of systems change. It has this designation, special category meaning, and so let's explore that a little bit further. I think one of the first things I want to draw from is that systems change is first a process of change. And this is a critical distinction because we're not necessarily referring to an intervention delivering a result, right? We're considering the process by which the change comes around. So the agent of change is not the NGO or development project. The agent of change is the actor within the system. So what we're assessing is not just whether we achieve the outcome, but the process by which that outcome was achieved. And does that process reflect a way in which actors in a system are interacting, interrelating, working together in different ways to solve problems? Because that's really kind of a core aspect. It's is the system able to generate this result over the long term? And that has a lot to do with process. And so I put up two definitions that I thought really pointed me to kind of this understanding of system change as a process. USAID, how they define systems practice, as well as SFG, particularly in their collective impact field, which really emphasize this idea around system change as an approach or a process. Secondly, system change is a set of outcomes, right? And I think there's a couple key words that I'm going to put here. Sometimes system change can be conceptualized as one change that goes from big to small, but a lot of definitions, including ones from DFID or Springfield-Sitter, refer to it as a set of outcomes. And I think it's interesting because oftentimes these outcomes are unknown at the outset. It's not just an outcome, but it's an outcome that reaches a certain degree of scale and sustainability that fundamentally changes how the whole system works or functions, right? So it's this type of things are fundamentally different. And so our focus of system change is it's really this idea around, are we doing the right things to change a system? We don't necessarily know at the outset. So by assessing change, we can learn over time what these sets of conditions are for system change and how we're going to enable these outcomes to have this transformative impact in terms of how the system functions. And oftentimes these types of changes are not superficial, right? They're kind of deep-seated changes in rules, norms, institutions, etc., that really form and shape how the system works. I want to take a brief pause here and just kind of give people a chance to complete this Menti poll. So I put in this Menti link and I'm going to share my screen for the results, and I'm hoping that we could answer a couple questions. So let's see if I can do this without making. All right. So I'm going to share, and then I'm hoping everyone could see my screen. I'm going to assume yes, because I can't see anything else. If not, Anna, someone else, please come
Yes, we
off.
can see your screen.
Perfect. All right. And I believe in the chat, someone has put this type of systems you're assessing. So yeah, it'd just be helpful to understand how you've defined or how you've conceptualized or thought about the systems in which you're trying to assess. This is great. It's interesting because you're starting to see different scales of systems, right? So we talk about changes, for example, at the organization, changes within sectors, changes within value chains, changes within whole kind of economies. We've seen that not all systems are market systems. There's health systems, labor systems, various types of other systems that are happening. It's also interesting to see that some people have defined systems, or they're putting up their systems in reference to particular function. So for example, you see job creation, right? So what is a job creation system? That could be a set of systems functionally that create jobs, right? And so we're starting to understand and think about systems, not just in terms of a sector definition, but in terms of what they do and the types of things that they facilitate. And so tourism marketing, so right. So we can see that we're intervening across systems, multiple systems. In fact, one project might be intervening across several systems. And having this kind of concrete understanding of what are these systems and how we define them is going to be one of the key points around setting boundaries that we're going to talk about next. I then wanted to prompt you around what types of changes you are assessing. I am curious, and I hope this one works. So yeah, if you could just kind of, it should be multiple choice select. Think about the types of changes that you're assessing, right? So for example, we might have a standard indicator around adopting new practices, And so, we report out on the number of farmers that adopt climate smart technologies, right? That would be a behavior and practice. But are we also looking at other different types of changes in the systems? Are we looking at how alliances or linkages formed? Are we considering power distribution, right? Are we trying to create more equitable gender dynamics within a household? Are we considering, do we have a political economy component? It only allows you to select one. All right. Anyways, your top change you're selecting, sorry about that. Is it more about kind of political economy, empowering different voice and agency, or rules and norms, kind of different changes in institutions and in creating kind of those enabling environments, or access to resources, resource flows, right? We could think about conservation, ecosystem management. And so, yeah, these are some of the ways that I just kind of wanted to prompt people to think about what are the different types of changes that we're assessing. All right, so I'm going to move back to the presentation. Let's see, and the presentation showing again, correct?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks, Anna. All right, let me just pull up real quickly, since I disoriented myself. Right, so about a year ago, 8 or so male practitioners, including myself, came together to really kind of harvest or define what was working in terms of assessing system change. And that's packaged into the guidance that Anna shared. I'm not going to repeat the guidance. I encourage you to take your time to look through it. There's actually really helpful sections that help you navigate to the problem you're having, because we know time's limited. We don't have time to read 60-page documents often. So if you have a particular question, there's sort of that first page really can kind of point you to where you need to go to help answer that question. But I am going to share some of kind of the main recommendations or takeaways. I want to start with this idea around boundaries, right? So what system are we trying to change? I actually find oftentimes we haven't quite well enough defined this, and so it makes the resulting system change assessment ambiguous. And so I want to clarify first that systemic change has ambitions to go beyond the immediate direct effects of the farmers that we're serving, right? Or whoever. Or even within private sector engagement. Oftentimes we're looking at benefits that go beyond the direct supply chain, right? It has this intention, ambition around larger impact. And while the scale of which varies by context and the specific challenges we're addressing, it's helpful to think about it in terms of differing spheres of control, right? We're looking to how we can have that broader influence that extends beyond our direct intervention. And so unpacking what the system is or systems that we're intervening in is really that first step to reveal our assumptions or expectations about how that system operates, what needs to change, how does it function? And if we don't do this step, later when we try to make value judgments about degree of system change, we don't have bearing, right? Because we end up labeling everything systemic without really understanding exactly what is the system that we've defined and being intentional about that. And so I think this is one of the first kind of fundamental recommendations that we make, right? Like learning what system we are trying to change and kind of is fundamental to assessing change. So go to chapter 1 if you're unsure about how to do that. There's some really good tools, tips, and guidance in there. The second one is oftentimes we're unsure about what outcomes we need to achieve to change the system. And so what we often have to do is we need to discover them as we engage and interact with the system through the process of implementation. So the process of outcome identification is really critical and one that needs to be recurring throughout the project, right? Not only at the hypothesis or inception phase where you look ahead, but really throughout implementation, looking for those secondary or unintended consequences, regularly reflecting on the range of outcomes, including the less explicit ones, like we talked about, shifts in rules and norms, that are necessary and sufficient for the whole system to change. So we really need a MEL system that's regularly collecting and evidencing those outcomes, and having regular reflection on it. So this process of outcome definition is really a key kind of process that needs to be integrated within MEL systems to be able to facilitate that strategic thinking and those conversations and reflections on evidence in terms of systemic change. And it's good to see that many have the systemic change outcomes or objectives defined, regularly updating them, evidencing them, and redefining and exploring what new and ones are needed is really part of the key aspect of assessing system change. That's chapter 2, by the way. Chapter 3 really gets at this idea to move away from this sense that we have an indicator that tells us system has changed, right? And the problem is that, or not the problem, but the reality is that system change is multidimensional, right? It happens across dimensions like scale, sustainability, value of impact, right? So scale is, we're interested in seeing change that continues to grow over time to benefits a large number or proportion of our population that we defined. Right? We're interested in sustainability, not just those kind of shorter term metrics that can vary or fluctuate or revert backwards, but really we're looking for evidence of kind of the enduring or long-term change or results over time. Impact is really kind of getting that value, right? So how do different people within the system value that change and understanding their different viewpoints, and people value that change differently. And so if we're not listening and intentionally gathering through our MEL system, those different viewpoints, we're imposing our own value judgments on change, whereas others might not consider it that has that value. And particularly those in the system that are most affected by it, their opinions are the ones that really matter the most. So we might gather quantitative evidence and indicators across these, and there are other dimensions we could consider. For example, we could use investment levels or satisfaction levels with different changes as proxies for sustainability or impact value. We could use numerical counts for concepts of scale. But it's really important to integrate that qualitative data and analysis, right? To provide the context to those numbers. And we've actually found that rubrics are really helpful tools to assess change in this mixed qualitative and quantitative way. And Megan, in her breakout session 2, I believe, is just going to talk about degree of change in these rubrics. That's chapter 3. And then finally, chapter 4 is that system changes are often described as black boxes. This is a metaphor to capture the opaque or sort of unclear, non-visible way in which change happens. And it's really a challenge to understand or anticipate how a system will respond to intervention. And in hindsight, it's hard to deconstruct, right, your own contribution to change relative to the contribution of all these different factors or forces that are at play in making change happen. So this gets down to what is kind of this field of contribution analysis or various types of methods that help us to really understand what are these causal mechanisms. And in fact, I find this to be one of the most valuable parts of assessing system change, because it really is directly linked to adaptive decision making, right? If you can understand if your program had an effect on this change and why or why not, and what else influenced, then you can also understand how to sort of adapt, your interventions over time. And so I'll have a breakout group on that. And then it's also chapter 4 in our guidance. So now we've gone through, and we're going to wrap up this section pretty quickly. So now that we've gone through the 4 components of the guide, I'd just like to take this moment to reinforce a point that I hope has come across, and that in system change assessment, we're really moving away from this kind of traditional analyze first, implement according to plan later, right? We're trying to embed this process of continual assessment within a more adaptive, iterative approach to implementation, where we're experimenting and learning by doing. So I liken assessing system change to sort of orienting yourself and your teams in this uncharted terrain or territory, right? we're trying to tackle these problems because no one succeeded before, right? If we had a clear roadmap, we wouldn't be trying to do this, right? And so system change development assessments are really helpful to understand not just where we are, but how we can navigate in this uncertainty to eventually find our way to where we want to be in terms of change. I'm not going to go too broadly into these, but we've given this broad kind of overview of some of the core components. I would add that they're very real ways to get stuck or lost in assessing system change, and some of these problems are addressed in the guidance, right? So one of them is the difficulties of linking individual outcomes to broader systems change. Just because you changed a part doesn't mean you changed the whole. So we actually propose a rubric in the guide that's helpful for this. Another is the kind of slowness of change question. That was one of the pre-survey questions. Because change happens slowly, sometimes even beyond that 7-year timeline, how do you have a sense about if change is unfolding in a way, right? Is there evidence of this longer term change? And so we propose different types of indicators or ways of getting at that in the guidance as well. System change can have unintended consequences. And so there are methods about getting feedback from stakeholders on understanding and being able to spot those, right? And not just having these blind spots to our causal logic, but seeing what else is happening within that broader system. The helicopter lens, if you've read the practical guidance to assessing system change. And then a couple other topics. So all that's to say is that there are a lot of challenges to doing this, but there's also a lot of innovation and a lot of really solid ways to solve these challenges. In terms of the touch points, right? Like, and this is a very kind of traditional life cycle, but I find that if we go through these steps, defining boundaries, outcomes, degree of change, so these happen at different kind of timeframes within a cycle. This could be an intervention cycle, a year, a fiscal year. It could be a partnership cycle. It could be a component cycle. It can happen. It can be any type of cycle, but oftentimes in terms of how we define success, really thinking through the system boundaries and what are the necessary and sufficient changes that we hypothesize are critical. It's kind of that first key thing to solve when you're launching an activity. In implementation, understanding quickly, right? Not waiting the full year. Are you on the right track? So really that process of observing outcomes and getting feedback from diverse actors. From then harvesting, right? Can we leverage our survey instruments to not just gather our standard indicator data, but some additional contextual or other data on contribution, or other or elements of scale and sustainability. So there's some really useful indicators that you can add. Ben Fowler will lead that first breakout group to talk about this today in the Mel Clinic. And then finally, adaptation, right? So if we deconstruct our contribution and the contribution of other elements, how can we involve technical teams in that process of self-assessment and reflection? Because it's in those meetings that often the most important programmatic decisions are made in terms of the activity. And the whole point of this is navigating ourselves to be more effective in facilitating systems change. So I'm going to take a break from talking. I'm going to pass the mic. We're going to hear from two different colleagues that are going to share one thing that they found that has really helped them in terms of assessing systems change. So Zul, are you there?
Yes, done.
Great. The floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Yes. I'm gonna share a little bit about why assessing system change is valuable to me. This is like personal experience. Assessing system change because the first one is change is no longer confusing because not because it's not complex anymore actually, but more like I know it's complex, but now I am no longer trying to find the ultimate solutions as if it's a math problem. Now it's more like I will navigate with the changes. And also the boundaries and conditions change, and which is why both are factors in our strategy. It's the nature of assessing systemic change, and then we constantly collect information and extract learning from it to help us adapt our strategy. And I also find it assessing systemic change helps me confirm that contribution doesn't need to be complex, but still needs to be thought through. Sometimes we can pull off some simple practical methods more confidently when critical and focused. It's reflected in the paper, especially when we are deciding whether we would like to do the difference in difference or counterfactual versus before and after. And I also find it valuable to discuss our methods with stakeholders, for example, donors and the local government, so they could boost each other confidence in assessing systemic change. When they know our method, it's more comfortable for me to communicate the results of the measurement. Nevertheless, with the complexities and the many options in assessing systemic change, we still need to keep some good practices, such as collecting evidence, even on our unintended impacts, and clarifying the outcomes. Plus, we still need to stay critical of the blind spot. For example, one of the blind spots that I often unaware is if I am trying to claim an impact, it can also be caused by alternative causes, not singularly by my interventions. Such exercise is still very important, I think.
Great. Thank you, Zul. Yeah, I really like that last point that you made. I find it the same, right? And there's this quote from the guide that says like, we are not, I'm gonna pull it right now. We are not the creators of change. We're the mentors, coaches, and advisors. The people in charge of the change are the individuals and organizations within the systems. And so it really kind of throws that wrench in contribution. And so sussing out, our impact, or not trying to overly claim our impact, acknowledging, in fact, celebrating really the contributions of others as part of this is really the kind of heart of systems change initiatives. And I think, that needs to be incorporated with it, as you mentioned. That's really great. Thank you for sharing, Zul. Next, Hinak, can you come on camera as well and share with us your example?
Yeah. So what you're seeing on the screen here is an example from a program that we worked on, which was an FCDO program in Ethiopia called Land Investment for Transformation. And so it was focused on the land market, and specifically this is an example of land rental. But I think when I think about systems change, what was another role that I felt like I played as kind of the MEL coordinator in this space is being the kind of an investigative journalist, if you will, of trying to document that change that may have happened. And so finding any kind of an indication or any hint of change that may be happening at the systems level or in kind of institutional level that wasn't directly pushed or instigated by us. And so what ended up happening was that, when we would have these monthly meetings where we'd have our regional coordinators come, things would come out in those sessions that were so critical in terms of how we were thinking about systems change. But some of our team members would say it kind of like off the cuff, was just a normal observation. And so that led us into creating this kind of, and I'm a big lover of trackers, but incorporating that more into our MEL system, as you see here, and mapping into the result chain, where, as Dan was talking about, this idea of mapping those outcomes. And so in our case, we did that more through the actors in which we were working with. And as you can see there, like, we were using a wide range of sources, but then we started having our regional teams as well, being able to assess and having conversations with different actors and getting to the behaviors and the changes that they were seeing, and how, if there was any change in the thinking around some of these pieces. For those of you who may know the context in Ethiopia, talking about market and land in the same sentence was, very problematic when engaging with any kind of public partners. But it was incredible to see the shift as, one, the evidence was being generated, but the demand was also coming from the communities we were working with. But seeing those little hints and indications of change was what would help us then to be able to map it back to our result chain and then talk about it in kind of an annual basis as a brief that we would create. And a lot of that was also pushed by, I have to applaud FCDO that they, in their annual review that they would do for us, one of the reviewers was an MSD specialist, and she would really push us to the test and really question our approach. And so it made us, have to kind of up our game when we talked about what contribution we made and any claims that we were having around that front. And so I think for us, it was the systemic intent, as Don was saying, was always there. But I think in terms of how it fit into our ongoing activities wasn't clear until we started kind of seeing some of these indications come up, and then we more intentionally integrated it through kind of quarterly reviews and the semi-annual reviews, more qualitative ways to then consolidate it with all the other types of evidence we were collecting for the project to talk about those instances and then make those claims around contribution. And so that, when we would map these out, like at every point, those leading the interventions were involved in that discussion. But then presenting it in this way was also to get at a point where we are all discussing it together to say, where do we feel things are changing in the way we want? What are the significant changes in the system? And are the constraints that we initially identified, actually being addressed in a way that is outside of our involvement, in a way that is lasting. So that was kind of the experience that we had in that program, and something I'm also trying to bring in my current role at IDE in terms of integrating that piece into the existing line of evidence that we already have in projects, so that we are thinking of the big picture while we're dealing with the kind of day-to-day or monthly monitoring activities. So that's a little bit from my experience.
And I really love that phrase you use, investigative journalist. I feel like that really captures like a lot of the spirit of assessing systems change, and particularly about how you opened the process to be more inclusive, right? Like oftentimes these processes can be a bit extractive, right? Pulling data you need to sort of fulfill your compliance reporting indicators, right? Things that we have to do, but actually valuing the perspectives of others, incorporating those within the frameworks and within the outcomes, and kind of facilitating that decision-making process based off those perspectives is really, I think, really transformational. When we talk about MEL as a system, I think that is really illustrating a lot about what it looks like in practice. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so we're ready to go to the MEL clinic. So I'm gonna pass the mic. I'm hoping, Anna, maybe you could help with the instructions here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. And there'll be, so now we're going to move into kind of smaller group discussions. And that'll be a nice place for us, I think, to like, for everyone to be able to unmute. You can turn your videos on, and have a little bit more of an exchange, debate, share what you've been finding, working on, wrestling with around these three areas. So in a minute, you're gonna have the opportunity to self-select into the group that you want to be in. We have a half an hour for this, and so you can stay in one group the whole half an hour if you want to, or if you want to switch around, we will kind of have a natural pause halfway in, 15 minutes in, if you'd like to switch to a different group. We're going to use Miro for this. So just a heads up on that. Each group will put each of the group leads will put the link to the chat in there when they kick it off. So in a minute, you will have the opportunity. So right above the chat, sorry, right below the participant kind of bar on your right-hand side, there's going to be a little box that pops up that says that you can, that breakout groups are now open. If you click on the blue line, so this is the picture right here on the slide to the left. If you click on the blue line that says show all breakout sessions, then you'll have the option to join whichever one you are interested in joining. If you'd like to change your mind and when you're ready to shift, you can click again here on the little show other breakout session thing on that's in blue that'll be in the upper right hand corner, and shift to another session. And then when you're back, we'll talk a little bit more about the office hours that are coming up, the slots that we're opening up there, as well as get your feedback and have some kind of participatory discussion around where else USAID should be investing in this area. So Kyla, if you can open up the breakout sessions, we will move there. Great. So you can see that breakout sessions have started. And please feel free to select the one that you'd like to see, and we'll see you on the other side.
All right. I hope everyone had a really enlightening time with your groups, and that kind of there was a very rich discussion. I'm sure there was. What I want to do now is walk through with you some slides that are going to demonstrate a little bit around the work that MSP, and particularly this learning stream on M&E and CLA, has been doing to date, because we would really love to have your feedback on where we go forward in the next little bit. So to do that, I'm going to take a little bit of time to give you a quick overview of the learning stream and what we've been doing so far. You can see in the top right corner, we have a QR code. So you can scan that in order to access all of the resources that have been coming out from the stream. But in broader terms, MSP has 5 different learning streams. And this stream has several key objectives. One is to generate evidence on the scalable and sustainable impacts of an MSD approach. The second one is to enhance monitoring of MSD program performance and emerging systemic changes. The third is to center the role of learning in driving systemic changes. And the fourth is to unlock any systemic barriers that are affecting the ability of all of us as practitioners to do effective MEL for MSD. So very briefly, what we're going to ask at the end of this, and we're going to use another Miro board, is for you to contribute some of your ideas on what you've seen and what you would like to see as some of the priorities for MSP moving forward. So just a quick overview of some of the things that we have been doing so far for context. One is generating evidence on the scalable and sustainable impacts of an MSD approach. We have long struggled as a field to generate that evidence, primarily because opportunities to conduct studies long after the close of an MSD program are few and far between. And so MSP has stepped up, and USAID have stepped up and began funding ex post evaluations. And so 2 ex post studies have been done, as well as an additional one shortly after program closure of programs using elements of an MSD approach. And those are generating some very interesting findings. The first one has been published already on Senegal, and looking at 3.5 years after program close, what have been some of those enduring results. So I encourage you to check that out. The second area is about enhancing resources and the overall practices of monitoring of MSD programming, including of systemic changes. And so, of course, this event today is very much within that objective, as well as the guidance document that was released. We've held several MEL clinics with program level MEL leads that have generated this, as well as guidance around understanding adaptive management and working on that. We've also provided input into USAID's internal fundamentals of MSD training. And a third objective area is centering the role of learning in driving systemic change. And there we have released a paper called Shifting the Locus of Learning, and shared some of the key contents of that in 2 different webinars. And alongside that, we've also issued some practitioner guidance on how different MEL programs have in practice, MSD programs have in practice been applying this and working with their partners and the systems they're focusing on to enhance systemic change. So here's a couple of snippets of different strategies that we identified as driving that. So with that, I want to turn us over to the Miro board. And so I'm going to share my screen and encourage us all to move over there. If somebody can share within the chat the link for it, that would be wonderful. And then we can all move over there, and then I will walk it through on my own screen. I hope everyone can now see this. Essentially, we have 2 main questions we'd like to ask you. The first one is, how could MSP support you or the sector's monitoring, evaluation, learning, and or adaptive management related needs over the next 2.5 years? Are there practical tools, guidance, trainings, webinars, communities of practice, etc., that would help? And so to provide a little bit of a prompt, We asked, as related to our objectives, do you have thoughts on how we could best support implementers' monitoring of MSD program performance and emerging systemic changes? Building off what we're discussing today, how can we support evaluators and programs to better evaluate MSD programming? How can we better support partner and system learning to enhance systemic change? How can we address any systemic constraints that you might be facing to better MEL for MSD? Are there particular requirements or things that you're struggling with that you'd like to see tackled with? And are there any other topics we haven't already covered, but that you'd like to see be included and be tackled? So that's the first thing we'd love to get your feedback on. The second question is there anything so far that you've seen from MSP relating to MEL that you found really helpful? And if so, what was it and kind of why did you find it to be helpful? We'd love to get that feedback from you. And then finally, if you're seeing an idea someone else has written that you really resonate with, feel free to grab one of these thumbs up and move it over to the relevant sticky that is resonating for you. If you're struggling with the Miro board, I know in my group in the last session, there was somebody who was struggling with being able to fully use it. If that's the case, you can just write into the chat what you want to have added, and we'll pop it in for you. So that's not a problem. And of course, as I'm sure you've figured out by now, you can just double click on a sticky and start typing, and it will show up, and you can just pinch your mouse or your touchpad to zoom in and read more carefully. So let me stop there. Are there any questions that anyone has? If there is, please let us know, either in the chat or you just go off mute and let us know. And otherwise, yeah, I encourage you to jump in and start adding some things onto the stickies.
I see you talking. You're on mute. Are you reading to yourself, or I just thought I would flag in case you're intending to speak to the rest of us.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, no, I was just looking at some of these questions are on the evaluation side. And I was saying, you know, one of the things that I've seen, perhaps others have as well, is the reality that it can be really challenging for us to, you know, have evaluations that are happening of our MSD programs really capture the results maybe that that are happening. And sometimes traditional approaches to evaluation aren't always resonating very aren't working the kind of approaches that perhaps work very well for other types of programming. So I'm seeing in here the idea of having an office hours or consultant approach to identify some common challenges and share ideas on how to overcome it. That's a really interesting idea. Or share some specific evaluations, maybe ones that worked well and less well. That would be very interesting to do. Sharing knowledge around frameworks that can be useful, like the Disrupting System Dynamics framework as an example. Yes. Cross-sharing of lessons learned. I think that's really interesting. Supporting training on methods to evaluate systemic changes. Yes. And having budget, okay, to evaluate them. Okay. But ensuring that the evaluation team has at least one system thinker. Yes, that's a very interesting point. Kind of what are the requirements that an evaluation team needs in order to be able to effectively evaluate systemic changes and MSD programming? I think that's very, very wise advice. I noticed a hand up at one point. If that person wants to say something, that would be great. And I'll keep summarizing a couple of the key ones as well. So I'm seeing for the monitoring side, you know, very much building on what we're doing today. A suggestion that sessions like this one that we're doing, more of them would be good. That's helpful feedback to get. Maybe also though something that's training oriented to complement could be helpful. And if anyone has suggestions on, you know, obviously monitoring is a very big area. So if people have ideas on specific aspects that they feel would be particularly helpful to have a training focus on, that'd be really helpful. Feel free to add it to the stickies in terms of some specifics. And I see here someone flagging, you know, how we can use rapid learning studies as one way to identify gaps. And so sharing how to carry these out could be very important for practitioners. That's great to hear. Right, and maybe about what aspects of monitoring should have an orientation towards reporting versus which ones might actually be less about that. I also think this one speaks perhaps also to one of the later questions, which is around the more elements of what systemic constraints might exist in terms of, you know, long lists of standard indicators that might mean there's less available time for conducting kind of more learning oriented or CLA aspects of learning. Let's see down here on how we can support list learning for systemic changes. Regular learning sessions like QPRs and pause and reflects. Yes. Fund real demo projects of market actors that capture how they apply insights in their work. That's very interesting. Right. So how actually is that that process happening internally with some of our partners, and what can we learn from that process, perhaps in how we design our own programming approaches. When we go to the question about how we can kind of institutionally better support effective MEL for MSD through collaboration and participatory approaches. I assume that's meaning kind of between programs and USAID staff. Increasing awareness of contribution methods. Okay, so maybe I'm assuming meaning moving away from rigorous or not rigorous, but attribution heavy approaches, asking a lot of learning questions, right? Requiring MST programs to really specify the systems and subsystems they are working in and the outcomes that they expect and that they're finding. That's very interesting. I'm seeing a point here about taking away some performance indicator requirements. Right. I think we've probably all seen that some MSD programs really struggle in terms of being able to adequately focus on capturing systemic changes and things like that, depending on how many standard indicators they're needing to focus on.
Great. Ben, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for taking time to put your comments and ideas in there. We're gonna move to wrap up here. So I just want to put up this slide here on the office hours, which we're excited to be able to offer. Sort of figuring out how to translate. I hope that today has sparked a lot of both conceptually as well as practically, tactically, sparked some useful ideas, some things you might want to go back and rethink, and provided an opportunity to I hope also share some of what's come from your experience. So we will be offering, I'm going to put the link to the form. So we're going to be offering, we have 15 slots right now. Give me a minute to find it now. I can't find it. Actually, Sarah, if you could put the link to the Google form for some reason. Oh, here it is. Okay. Too many tabs open. I'm putting the link in the chat to the Google form where you can express your interest in participating in one of these office hours. So the intent for these is really just to create a space where folks can come with a very program specific, context specific question. Here's my AMELP, here's my survey questions, here's my agenda that I want to use for my team meeting next week, or I'm, or like our annual work planning session. And just get some really direct, specific feedback and eventually kind of free technical assistance. So please register your interest. We have 15 slots available, and we'll reassess if there's a lot of interest, whether or not we maybe can open up an additional round of slots some point next year as well. We have until the 15th of November, so that's next Wednesday, to register your interest, and then we will let you know a week later how to select a time. We'll use like a Calendly scheduler. Ben, Dunn, and Megan, and perhaps a few others that we'll draw in will all be available for those office hours. Thank you so much. I hope that this is really the start of a conversation or additional conversations and exchanges that we're going to be able to have, and really looking forward to more of these opportunities in the future. Feel free to come off camera, come off mute, say hi to everybody, put a note in the chat, and thank you so much for joining us.